Hey friends, I want to talk about journaling, which is such a core practice for me at this point, such a main part of my life. Um, and I had a really good conversation with a friend this morning about journaling, and I thought I would share some things that I said there and see if anything else came up. I think it was maybe 2019 or 2020 that one of my major goals for the year was to develop a journaling practice. I had journaled before, off and on throughout my life, but never consistently. And so I made it one of my goals for the year just to really develop a journaling practice. And I guess the failure mode that had happened in retrospect when I was younger was even starting as a kid would be like I would get a journal and it would be like a physical notebook and I would write in it by hand and I would sort of narrate my day. Like I did this and then I did that at the end of the day, and I was kind of implicitly really concerned with it being good because it was like in a physical notebook, and often the notebook was like kind of pretty and expensive. And yeah, I just also had a really limited conception of what a journal was, where it was like a daily record of my what I did. And I'm glad for that. I've been glad to find journals that I made from those times. But that's just such a limited perspective of what a journal is. And I've really exploded and expanded my conception of what a journal is over the years. And I'm so glad that it's much bigger. And in fact, talking about this makes me want to explode and expand it even bigger. But anyway, so that was kind of what I was coming in with in 2019 or 2020, I forget which. And I kind of thought about it. I was like, well, how am I going to do this? I basically wanted to get to the point where journaling was a regular habit that I did, if not daily, regularly. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to do that. And I'm so glad I succeeded at that. I've just absolutely succeeded at that and blown that out of the park. And it was, in retrospect, it was kind of a modest goal for the year, but I'm so glad that was my goal then, because that's been just such a foundation for so much that's come since then for reasons I'll get into. But the thing that I figured out, and I don't really know what gave me this idea, but was I think I was asking around. I think on Twitter I posted, I could probably find this if you search for it. Also, you could find this, I could find it. I was like, hey, do you have a journaling habit? And if so, what's worked for you? And the thing that I figured out from, I guess, what people said or my own ideas was what I'm going to do is instead of trying to have one journal that's a physical journal that I write in every day or something like that, I'm going to have as many journals as possible. I'm just going to get all the journals and write in whichever one I feel like writing in whenever I feel like it, and kind of discover over time how I like to journal and what ways I like to journal. So I remember I had a little pocket. I've had all these little pocket notebooks at different times in my life. I had one of those. I had a slightly bigger notebook that I'd maybe keep at my desk. I think I had a couple of those, maybe one in the room I was staying in and one at my workstation. And those I could put in a backpack if I went somewhere. And then I just had as many digital journals as possible. I must have created Google Docs at that time. And then I had my Twitter account, and I started creating Twitter alts at that time. And I also was using feeds extensively, which I've written about elsewhere, which are basically like digital social journals in something like Slack or Discord. And I just created all the journals. And at that time, I must have had like 9 or 10 different options for where I could journal. I remember I had this notebook that my mother made for me, which was a threefold, 3-ring binder with 3 different kinds of paper in it. One was lined paper, one was unlined blank paper, and then one was graph paper. And I loved that notebook so much. It was one of the best gifts. Because those different kinds of paper are useful for different kinds of things. And so I could draw on the white unlined paper, and I could write a normal journal entry on the lined paper. And then if I wanted to make some kind of diagram or track something, which I did a fair bit of, the graph paper was really good for that. And they should make physical notebooks like that have those just built in. But anyway, and so I just kind of iteratively found what worked for me, and I just journaled anywhere I wanted. And if I had something I wanted to write down, then I'd just reach for the notebook that was near me and write it there. And then over time, I kind of developed a sense of which digital spaces and mediums really worked for me to digital journaling, to journal digitally. And yeah, I just kept doing that. I've done that since that time. And now I have, with feeds, which I use extensively, it's been a little while since I counted, but I know I counted like last year and I had like 50 feeds, and now I have even more. That's a lot. Like you may not want to use feeds, and even if you use feeds, you may want to just have one or two feeds. But I have figured out that I like having a lot of different feeds in a lot of different places, different servers, and using them for different topics or different levels of privacy or vulnerability. And some of my feeds are just for me. Like I have a Discord server that's literally just for me, and no one else can read it, and I can post whatever I want there, and that's sort of unfiltered. And then, Twitter is the opposite of that, where it's like available for the world to see, and anybody who's on Twitter or even has an internet account can see it. And there's gradations of privacy between there of like which friends I'd like to share with, or about what topics, or in which community. And I really figured out that digital journaling, especially with feeds, works really, 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 really well for me. And I remember talking to Claude about my journals at one point last year, maybe, or maybe even the year before that, I forget. And Claude had this reflection that just blew my mind, which was like, basically that journaling has become my main spiritual practice. For so long, for my 20s, meditation was my main spiritual practice. And then I think since I've left the monastery, journaling has become the most consistent, most stable spiritual practice for me, where I write all day, every day, about what's happening to me, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, how my work is going, different ideas that I have. I just journal all day, every day, about whatever's on my mind, whatever's on my heart. And sometimes that involves emotional, psychological debugging, or talking about social dynamics in an encounter I had, or some event I went to, or maybe it's just going off about some idea I have, or some dream I have, or getting really specific about how a project is going to work, or like why I'm doing something in a particular way. And having an abundance of journals for that has been so valuable. And I especially like the form of social journaling that feeds provide, where it's sort of in a semi-private community where it's people that you have some connection to, and it's not just open in the public. And also people can reply, or they can ask questions, or they can emoji react. And knowing that what I'm writing is likely to be read by someone just really helps. Like having that social element, really hardwired thing, like sort of took my journaling practice into overdrive, where it was like motivating to journal and know that people were going to see it, or emoji react, or ask questions, or be impacted by what I said. And I don't know, it's just much more motivating to me to like type things in a journal that I know other people will read and be impacted by and encounter and react to. I really love emoji reacts. I love when my friends react a lot to what I write in my feeds. And I do that for my friends when I read their feeds. I typically have lots of emoji reacts. It's like a love language. I love when people read what I write and sort of thoughtfully emoji react, and hearts or thumbs ups, or, whatever emoji feels resonant. And it's really a love language that I've come to appreciate. And with that, I've really developed the skill of what I would call cross-posting, where, say I have a really difficult personal encounter, something that, maybe like a breakup, for example, and there's heartbreak. And I feel like, on the one hand, that's really vulnerable for me. And on the other hand, I want to respect someone else's privacy. And it's not really the world's business. My love life is not the world's business as such. But often just from digesting that experience, there's really useful information and things that I learn from it that I do want to share with the world, even if I don't necessarily want to share the specifics of how I learned it, or who I learned it with, or like everything that happened. And so I've learned, you can cross-post that and digest it into like, this chunk is going to be really valuable for other people to read and maybe useful to them. And I really care a lot about that maximum deep benefit, helping as many beings as possible, as deeply as possible. And private journals are good for personal processing, but there's a lot of gold that comes out of that. And so I really value sharing what comes out of my journals more publicly when it feels safe to do so. And I've kind of learned how to excerpt parts of it so that it's useful to other people. And a lot of my writing comes from that. And then also over time, I start to notice trends of like, oh, wow, I have a lot of thoughts about this particular dimension of social interactions, or, oh, I have a lot of thoughts about this dimension of work or whatever. And because it's digital, I can really easily search, oh yeah, over these times I mentioned this keyword, and turn what initially were just private journals into a tweet or a thread or a blog post or a book chapter or even a whole book, that there's more there. And the order that I think the thoughts and the context that I think them on is not necessarily the final form that those thoughts want to take. Often they occur out of order or enmeshed in some particular context, and over time it can kind of become more general. And so I find journaling so useful for processing my daily life and my emotions and my social interactions and just making sense of what's happening to me, and also my spiritual practice, like if I meditate or have certain experiences, just sense making as to what's happening. And that's so regulating for me. It's so regulating to really write about my experience and validate my own experience and reflect it and digest it. It's somehow has just this very profound effect on my nervous system, where it gives me the chance to feel seen by myself and to validate my own experience. And then if something's painful, it's like, well, at least I'm going to learn a lesson from this. Like, I'm going to digest this experience into some discrete learning that means that next time something like this happens, I'll have more experience and kind of know how to face this in a better way. And that's been such an important part of my learning and feedback loops in so many dimensions of my life, certainly my work and different creative mediums that I use, but also relationships and friendships and just my own psychology. Like a lot of people will talk about this, that like creatively or productively doing your work in the world, a lot of it is just about managing your own psychology. And my psychology is pretty idiosyncratic. I've had to learn so much about my mind and my heart and my emotions and my feelings and my needs and my boundaries and my dreams and my desires. And I learn about that from journaling, and that self-knowledge, that really acute, in-depth self-knowledge comes from a lot of work journaling and reflecting. And, I do that in conversation also with my friends, and I am lucky to have a lot of friends that I can have really deep conversations with. I feel so blessed. But honestly, the thoughts and feelings that I have are so much more high volume and at a faster rate than is reasonable for any one person to keep up with. I just think a lot and feel a lot, and I need to be primarily responsible for processing my own thoughts and feelings, for making sense of my own experience, and then I can invite friends into that or receive support in aspects of that. But it's not reasonable to ask any one person to think and feel and sense make as much as I need to for my own well-being. And so journaling is great for that. And I love social journaling for that, because people can kind of pop in or out as they like, and it's not a burden. And in fact, it's a privilege to read someone's journals, actually. I think it's really a privilege to read a journal, to see what it's like to be someone else. And if you read someone's journal for months or years, you really get a sense of who they are and what they care about and what it's like to be them and what challenges they have and what gifts they have. And I think that's so beautiful. I love to read people's journals. I love to read my friends' journals. And I think it's such an important part of the work process too, of having an opportunity to really reflect and digest and process. I tried this thing and then I got stuck here. What's that about? And then, I really liked this aspect of this project, but I didn't like that aspect of this project. And to make sense of that and then iterate on that and reorient based on that and make new decisions based on that. And, sometimes you come up with new project ideas because of that. And having those fast feedback loops that are high bandwidth and a lot of sense making just means that you can grow so much more quickly and more deeply and do a lot cooler shit than you would if you weren't taking that time to reflect. And so I have this joke that the goal is to journal 3 times as much as anyone thinks you do. And if someone reads one of my feeds or 2 of my feeds or 5 of my feeds or 10 of my feeds, they don't know the half of it, because I have 50, 60, 70 feeds, and some of them are even higher volume than the ones they're seeing. And I love that for me. I really genuinely love that for me, because I just get up and I do stuff, and then I journal about it and I introspect about it constantly. It's like do introspect, do introspect, do introspect. There's really fast feedback loops between them. And I've been doing that for years, and I'm going to keep doing that for years. It's kind of like, I've seen people talk about this as like interstitial journaling or having a captain's log. I've seen both and Laura talk about that. And James Stuber, they have posts about that. So that's been really valuable to me, and just constantly debugging whatever's going on. I'd say there's 2 main feeds. There's two main feeds that I'm doing constantly. One is sort of a home feed, and one is an office feed. And there's gradations of that, like public-private versions of each of those within the servers that they're in. And it's like I'm always journaling about my feelings and my relationships and my day-to-day life and psychology and meditation practice in the home feed. And then I'm journaling about my projects and my work and the Service Guild in my office feeds. And then we have a curiosity Discord also. And so in there I have a bunch of topic-specific things like visual art or writing fiction or making music or whatever. And those are a bit slower and much more thematic. That works really well for me. And then I do still have physical journals. I have one journal right now that I'm writing a fiction novel in. And then I have one big moleskin that's like for if I need paper notes. And yeah, that works really well for me. I'd say most of my journaling is digital. That works really well for me. I didn't know that, whatever it was 6 years ago when I started doing this, that I was going to end up journaling digitally as much as I do. But that really works for me, and I love it, and I plan on journaling indefinitely. I'm sure the form or shape or place will change, but it also helps that I, as much as possible, do that cross-posting, and I do digest the day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff into like deliverables and turn it into something, right? It's not just going nowhere. I digest and transmute it into blog posts and tweets and threads and a larger body of work, right? Like even this video where I've thought a lot about journaling, and I'm able to talk about it for 20 minutes at a go, apparently. And so that's a lot of where my body of work comes from, is the fact that I've written so much about all this already and thought about it. And journaling is such a big part of that. Conversations are such a big part of that. And just constantly having conversations, constantly journaling, even feedback loops between those, journaling about conversations, talking to people about my journals. It's so nice to get on the phone with a friend who has access to my feeds and they've read them recently. And they're like, oh, wait, so tell me about this thing you said recently. And I try to do that for my friends that I read their feeds, of like, so you said this here, what does that mean? Or can you tell me more about that? Or here's a specific question. And if a big dimension of friendship is context and shared context, then reading each other's journals in a way that feels appropriate, like you're not oversharing or not sharing too much, or in a way that makes you feel overly vulnerable. When you have that kind of shared context asynchronously, it makes real life interactions or phone conversations or Zoom calls just so much more vibrant, because you already have so much to talk about and you've added so much shared context to the shared awareness already. And then you can go much deeper, much more quickly. And over time, that really compounds, where, I have friendships where we've just had so much shared context for years that there's this real intimacy and vibrancy that becomes possible. That's it's like the exact opposite of meeting someone at a party and having an awkward, stilted conversation because you know nothing about them. It's like there's so much you could talk about that you want to talk to them for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And so to sum up, journaling has been incredibly valuable for me, for managing my own psychology, for regulating my emotions, for making sense of my own experiences and a bunch of aspects of my life. It's also been incredibly powerful creatively for providing an engine for my writing and my other work, and also iterating on my work more rapidly, learning from it more deeply. And it's also incredibly valuable interpersonally to have that surface area between people where there's shared context, and it creates new depths of intimacy where if you're reading each other's journals, you just have so much more to talk about, so much more depth, and so much more vibrant conversations because all of that is already in the room. So I love journaling. It's been a main practice for me. It's also so funny because in my 20s, when meditation was my main spiritual practice, a lot of the explicit or implicit instruction of meditation, at least as I received it, was kind of like stop thinking, drop thinking, let go of thinking, come into the body. And that's obviously so important. I'm all about that. I'm really grateful for that. I learned from that. And I think there's something to really honoring your thinking and honoring your heart and what your heart is feeling and what you're caring about and what you're interested in, and trusting that, following that, and making sense of it on your own terms. And yeah, not betraying yourself or abandoning yourself by sort of exporting your sense making, or what's the word when you like give manufacturing to another country or something like that. Anyway, I'll think of the word later. But like, if you give someone else permission, or another tradition or something permission to make sense of your life, I think you're actually betraying yourself in a way. And it's been so valuable to take ownership of my own sense making, of my own life, and do that in my own way. And journaling has been such a big part of that. And it's interesting. I thought a lot about this recently. Like, I think there are some people like me who really benefit from extremely high verbal processing, where it's like talking and writing at great length, at high volume, at high speed, constantly about your own experience is the thing that manages your psychology such that you are like a sane, balanced, well-adjusted, emotionally regulated, integrated person that can live a vibrant life in connection with other people. And I think that when I didn't have this, it was so much more hard and confusing to just to be me and get through a day. Like, I had a really hard time in my 20s and in a lot of ways. And I imagine that if I was training at Maple in retrospect, and journaling had been my main practice, that a lot of that would have gotten unwound much more quickly. And and then from there, when you are integrated, and from a meditation perspective, when you are integrated and you've regulated your emotions and you know what you want and why you're doing what you're doing, and the whole mind body is integrated and harmonized, is unified, that is unification of mind. It's much easier to concentrate from that place and to dive deep into a non-conceptual meditation practice that's aimed at transcendence or enlightenment or something like that. And for me, that just seemed to require a ton of verbal processing. And I think all of that verbal processing is a key part of why I'm flourishing in my life now, because I know who I am. And when bumps come up, I know how to make sense of them and just journal about them and reflect them and process the emotions and come into a narrative of what's happening that allows me to feel what I'm feeling and make use of it and learn and grow from it and orient towards it in a way that's respectful to myself and all of that. And gosh, I'm so grateful for journaling. I feel really blessed to have done so much of it, and I look forward to doing more and to seeing what comes from it. And I hope this inspires you. I hope this is interesting to you, and I wish you well in your own journaling practice.